Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm an intuitive coach and mentor,
And I'm Luisa. I'm an awakening coach and energy healer.
and we're your spiritual besties.
We're just everyday women having an extraordinary human experience.
You see, we've both been led down the path of amazing discoveries through the power of spirituality.
So, we're here to share our experiences as we dive deep into all things sacred.
Our hope is that we can contribute to the collective conversation to help you feel less alone and more confident as you walk the path to becoming more connected with the universe.
We'd love for you to join us each week as we share our discoveries and navigate this journey together.
Such good stuff. This is more like, here are the two completely different versions of who I am in one room.
I love that.
That's so interesting. And I definitely want to dig into that more because I'd love to hear about that, because it sounds like maybe I see one version of you and then like Kristyn sees a different version of you. And so
Yeah, this is funny. So, hello for everyone watching and listening. Today is actually an interesting day for me. Exciting day. I was telling my coworker where I get to have my two co-hosts in one episode. So, I'm Luisa, and we have Kristyn, who I co-host the Flying Upstream podcast with, and obviously Melissa, who I co-host this podcast with, in which we focus on everything spiritual. The funny thing that Kristyn and I have talked about before is that we end up getting a lot of spiritual related guests on our Flying Upstream podcast. And so today we're going to do something very interesting and something I'm very excited about. But back to your question, Melissa, I want to kind of backtrack a little bit because these are my two co-hosts. And I just mentioned, I don't know if we were recording that, this is like having the two different versions of me in one room. And I think I think you get the softer version of me, the more like spiritually focused and like energetically and based on my human experience that I'm having. I think that's the basis. That's like the foundation of what you get. Where I think, Kristyn, you typically get the let's go, let's light this shit up. Let's freaking just hustle, go harder, as hard as we possibly can version of me. So that's what I mean by that.
I love that. I love that. Well, I'm excited to dig into this because I do get that side of you and I love that side of you. And I know that you and I have had some conversations also about our own respective spirituality and our own experiences. So I'm excited to dig into that side of it too.
Yes, yes. And so this is how Melissa and I connected initially, was based on our spiritual journey. So I had posted looking for my own podcast at the time, looking for people to share their stories of awakening, and Melissa and I connected that way.
So that was that was the beginning of this year, which is kind of crazy to think how quickly time has gone. But I think it was maybe February-ish timeframe when we connected, because it's so funny though, because it's like, oh, that was just February, but also it feels like, oh, we've known each other forever. But yeah, that was sort of how we connected. And so that's been our relationship. It's just been this everything spiritual. And I get this version of you that's energized, right? You still have energy because you're a manifesting generator. So you still have that piece, but you're much more like, let's just let it flow. Let's see where it goes. Like, let's kind of let it go where it takes us. And so we've had much more of like that kind of a vibe going on. And obviously our podcast is indicative of that because it's completely unscripted. We have no set talking points or anything. We just have a conversation and we let it flow from there. But I think, today we have a little bit more of an agenda in mind, right? And talking with Kristyn. And before you hopped on, Luisa, I was just kind of asking Kristyn a little bit about her spiritual awakening, spiritual journey so far. And it's interesting because it sounds like it's pretty new for her. And this is something that she's really just kind of starting to dive into. So I think I would love to hear more about that and, what that looks like for you, how you're feeling, and all that kind of stuff.
It's been a wild ride. So I would say the journey for me started when my now 6-year-old daughter was about 18 months old, and she was just starting to use words in a meaningful way and kind of have some phrases. So my father passed away in 2010, so way, way before she was born.
Mhm.
And I mean, my husband never even met my father. And I had a picture of my parents on the dresser, and my daughter points to the picture and she says, "That's grandpa." And I was stunned, stunned. Like, she's so young. I had never even talked about him, let alone pointed to the picture. Never. We don't even use the word grandpa because her other grandfather is called something different. So never even use the word. And I was just like, oh my goodness, what is happening? Like, completely unexplainable. And that really set the journey for us. I did ask her too. I said, "How do you know? How do you know that's grandpa?" And she said, "He comes to me at night when I'm crying and he gives me hugs,"
Oh,
which I nearly started crying because I was like, "Oh, like, what do you even say to that?" And
right. And obviously at that age, she would have no context for making that up, right? Like, so
right.
it's one of those moments where you're like, this is obviously true. Even if you, I mean, probably beforehand, you didn't necessarily believe that that was something that could really happen. But when they're that age, they're not
Yeah.
making stuff up. Like, they don't have that sort of capability in their brains yet, right?
Exactly, exactly. And it's just, I mean, luckily my husband was in the room when this happened. Otherwise, I might have thought I had really gone off the deep end. But I had a witness. It really happened. And, from there, there were just more things that she would say that there's just no way a little kid could know. Just even some things that were so profound. Like one day, I think she was about 3 at this time. I was really upset about something and I was crying. And she just comes over to me. She puts her hands on me and she said, "Mom, you don't have to worry. There's always someone right next to you to help you." And at the time, I thought, oh, like figuratively speaking, right? And now looking back, I realized she meant literally, like literally, there's always a spirit guide or an angel or somebody who's probably literally right next to me who is helping me through all the hard times. And it was just so deep and profound for a little tiny 3-year-old to just stop what she was doing, come over and tell me that, and then go back to it. So after so many of these situations, it became pretty clear that we needed to address this and learn about it, educate ourselves, which I did. And now she's 6. And I more recently got to a place where I didn't want to just support her and just say, yes, this is valid. Yes, there are spirits. Yes, all the things. But I felt like I needed to experience it myself to truly understand, just from my
Mhm.
own perspective, what the experience is like so that I can not only help her, but also try to guide her. And with that, that led me to the beginnings of my own journey. And I would say I'm still in the beginning stages of all of it, but it's been a pretty wild ride just for me too. So, yeah.
That's amazing. And also, what's interesting is I know that there are like coaches or guides in that space as far as like, not right now necessarily, but as your daughter gets older and matures to help her sort of like hone the skills and turn it off and on, which I think for someone who has those abilities, that probably is something that will be necessary at some point and helpful for her to be able to kind of like step away from feeling all the things and seeing all the things that it sounds like she's probably seeing in her day-to-day life. That is definitely something when you're talking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's so cool because there's like actually people who will help her to sort of develop that and hone it and figure out how to harness it as she gets older and kind of matures into it. But that is, it's so cool.
Yeah, I've done some research actually to see what is appropriate for her age. And I talked to a couple people who specifically work with children. Their
Oh,
advice was to wait until teenage years, like at least puberty,
mhm.
because otherwise, if you open the floodgates, if you will, too soon, it can actually be kind of traumatizing because they can be exposed to things that are really scary, spirits, people that are passed on in a way that might be too scary for them to cope with at such a young age. So we're kind of holding off, but I did speak to somebody else who had some good ideas about helping to lay the foundation for kids. So they might not be ready to drink from the fire hose, but we can at least start to give them some basic tools like the beginnings of a meditation, for example, and at least having that quiet time to go and reflect inward what's happening, things like that. I've also done my best to try to normalize a lot of this stuff because she does tell me that she'll go to school and talk about seeing spirits. And of course, my first thought is, the kids are going to make fun of you. Don't do that. But I actually asked her teacher, and her teacher said, I said, did she talk about seeing spirits at school? She said, oh, yeah, she talks about it. And I said, do other kids make fun of her? She said, no, I just tell the kids, some people see spirits, some people don't. It's okay. And they're young enough, they're just like, okay. And they move on with their day. So at least that part is okay for now, but just trying to help normalize a lot of this experience so that when the time comes and she, excuse me, is a little more aware of what it fully encompasses and the implications of it, she at least has a solid framework to build on.
I love that. I think that's a fine line between wanting her to censor herself in these other environments, right? Because it's like, yeah, I get it and I understand the social piece of it, but it's like at the same time, the more kids we can have who are normalizing this and who are kind of just like living into this, then the more sort of I'm sure that there are other kids who have similar experiences and are either too fearful of saying something or they have families who shut it down, basically tell them like, oh, you're making it up, oh, you're invisible friend or whatever. And so it's like, I would love to see an environment where like her teacher, is just saying, hey, yeah, some kids see it, some kids don't. Like, I would love to see that kind of continue and her to be able to continue showing up authentically as who she is and how she experiences the world, and then have other kids accept that and see it. And, I think that's one of the biggest things that Luisa and I talk about. And one of the biggest pieces of our show here is just talking about this stuff and just putting it out there and trying to normalize it and say like, hey, if you're going through these things, it's totally normal and there's other people going through it too. And that's sort of, I think, part of what we feel is our mission, is to put that out there and be like, hey, look, lots of people are going through this and it's a safe space for people to talk about it and explore it and be in it together. And so I just feel like I would love to see an environment where your daughter could grow up and stay in that authenticity and like stay in her true self and not have to ever censor herself just so that other people don't think differently of her.
Yeah, for sure. I fully recognize that it's my own hang up because I grew up in an environment that was like, you need to be perfect. You need to say the right things, wear the right clothes, get the good grades. And I do realize that's my own thing. Like, oh, don't do that. They'll make fun of you. They'll, whatever. I do censor myself around her. And I think we are lucky that the school she goes to prides itself on inclusivity and really helping children lean into who they are, whoever that may be. So I agree. Hopefully it won't be an issue. I actually kind of love that she does it at school because I asked her, do your friends see spirits too? And she's like, oh yeah, all of them. Like, obviously. And
Maybe,
so
maybe
you
they
know,
really all do.
maybe they do. I don't know. But at
Yeah.
least it's a positive experience for her for now.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I think it also shows the value of what happens when we accept what somebody else is saying, right? Like in this situation, it's our children. I grew up in this very be seen, not heard environment. And I think this is what happens when we allow our children to be and when we embrace and nurture, give them the space to be able to be themselves. Because what has happened for you, Kristyn, has been you start to notice that your daughter noticed these things and that she saw spirits and that she had an understanding of the world that even though you weren't necessarily like seeing the world that way, instead of shutting it down, it opened you up to your own spirituality, right? Which is what has brought you here. It opened you up to probably to start questioning or whatever. Like, I'd love to hear what that was like for you. Like, what her experience kind of started to make you do for your own self and like question in your own spiritual journey.
Well, I will say my daughter had one experience that was pretty intense for us, and she was not even 2, so I doubt she remembers it, but it was pretty intense for us. One night she was in her crib, we had put her to sleep, and we just hear this screaming, like she was screaming at the top of her lungs. We look in the monitor, like what could she be screaming at? It wasn't like I'm hungry or I need a diaper. It was like screaming. We look in the monitor and we see these like white little orbs, 2 of them, kind of almost like chasing each other across the monitor. And we're like, what is that? So we burst into her room, like, what's happening? And she's crying and screaming. We calm her down, and she tells us this whole story about a dog and a fox, and they came out of her mirror. They were chasing her, this whole thing. And that really was a turning point for me because I was like, okay, this is not like a cute little she knows my dad thing. This is really impacting her life, her emotions, her everything, her sleep now. So I need to really figure this out. So, like a good tech parent, we posted on Reddit to see what happens.
I love that.
And yeah, I mean, it was so helpful. We got a ton of responses. A lot of people explained things to us that we didn't know. Like her room at the time, the closet doors were mirrored. We didn't know about mirrors and what that means. And so, okay, we learned about that. We covered up the mirrors. We changed things in her room a little bit. I gave her a dream catcher above her bed, actually, which she hated, like would not tolerate it at all, made me take it down 2 days after I put it up. But that was just a huge turning point for me. And so once I kind of realized that this is real, this is very, very real, and this is impacting my child, and really I need to show up for my child. And the only way that I can do that is to be engaged in this myself. And so I think at the time I was very curious and I was interested, and I started just watching videos and just kind of seeing what was out there. I read a lot of books actually about it, but it took me a little longer to take the step myself and actually say, okay, I'm going to really do this. I don't know how to do this on my own. So I found someone that offered a class on awakening. I did the class and it was amazing. Like I loved every single class. I felt like I learned so much. I felt like I had an emotional response. Like pretty much every meditation that this teacher led us through, I was just crying and crying and crying. And it was, I just, every class, I was like, I can't believe this is happening. Like, I can't believe this is real to experience it myself after having a lifetime of being taught otherwise, that ghosts are not real. It's made up around Halloween. And a lifetime of that to then have these experiences is just so wild. I think I also had to overcome second guessing myself. Our teacher would always say, try to let go of expectations, right? So don't think about what an experience should be because you've seen it in the movies or on TV. Just let go, imagine you're in an empty space, and then let things and spirits come to you and whatever that's going to be. And I really tried to do that. Okay, here's an example. So the first time I met one of my spirit guides. So the first time I met my spirit guide, one of my spirit guides, I asked to meet my spirit guide who would help me be successful in business and finance. And so my spirit guide shows up, and it was this huge, like polished marble statue, very tall, thin, very grand, totally not what I was expecting. And as soon as I saw this spirit, I had this overwhelming urge to just burst into tears, which I did, but also to just like wrap my arms around like their legs and just scream like, don't leave me, don't leave me. Like it was like I'd seen a good friend or a relative that you hadn't seen in forever. Like so strong. It was almost like you can imagine a little kid getting lost in the store and then they find their parent and they're like, don't leave me, right? It was like that. It was so intense for me. It was so intense. And I think I cried after that for like 2 days straight, just because I just could not get over that experience. I just could not get over it. And it was just amazing to me to think that just something so simple, just a simple guided meditation could lead me to that experience. Like I never would have guessed that in a million years, ever. And I shared this with my teacher, and I was like still bawling. I'm still a mess. And she's like, so sweet. Oh, it's a reunion. I was like, oh, okay, I'm not over it. I'm not over it. But she explained that before we have our human experience, we have contracts with our spirit guides. And so it was something that I had already known, which makes sense, but I didn't really understand that going into that initial meeting with my spirit guide. And I thought because I had asked to meet the spirit guide who would help me with business and finance, they would be a little more like proper and professional and not that I would have this emotional breakdown.
You're like imagining like a tax accountant.
Yes, that's
What?
what I was thinking.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Oh my
it was just
Um,
wild. So I think that's been the most profound experience so far. The other the other experience I think that I had about a week ago was that the same teacher had a class she held specifically for, I'm gonna say it wrong, Samhain. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
You're going with that.
we'll
You're
go with
gonna say
that. Okay. She she held a class specifically for Samhain and led a meditation to meet Hecate, which was pretty exciting for me too. Yeah, and that was interesting to me because it was not one of my spirit guides, and I was really curious going into this, like what that would be, because she is a goddess known to have 1,000 faces. She can appear in so many different forms,
Mhm.
and to me, she appeared first as a tiger and then halfway kind of switched to a leopard.
Mhm.
So similar, but a little different. So it was interesting that she had switched halfway through because it was almost like, wait, did I make that up? I don't, did I? Maybe I did. I don't, it's like, I don't know. Maybe the whole thing is made up. But that was pretty exciting too. And she kind of laid down next to me and was almost like snuggling up to me. And that was an interesting experience because I also don't really think of spirits or angels or anything as being kind of cuddly, snuggly, like want to like snuggle up to you. I would imagine, like if you're at home, your dog kind of cuddles up to you and you watch TV together, sort of thing. That's what it felt like to me. It was like, oh, like it was so sweet. And that was also just really eye-opening. I would not have thought to have that kind of experience as well.
I think that you bring up a really good point, and I think something that many of us, including myself, experiences when we first start, seeing or feeling or hearing the things is, am I just making this up? And it's really easy to believe that you're just making it up because of the context of all the beliefs that you have formed throughout your entire life, right? And how you've been told all along the way this stuff isn't real and you're just making that up. And for me, it's interesting because when I look back now at my childhood, and I've talked to Luisa about this before, I've always seen things and I've always been super intuitive, but um it was like just society, and my mom was pretty open to it, but like not in helping me develop it in any way. It was just like, I believe you, but sort of like it's just left there. But then, just growing up in society and everything that we hear is that's not real. And, past lives, that's not a thing that Christians believe in and talk about. And most people in America grew up with some sort of Christianity. So I think that it's really easy for us to just think think I'm probably making this up. Like, this isn't real. I'm just imagining these things in my head when I'm meditating or whatever. And I think one of the thoughts that really helped me to kind of get through to the other side of it was this idea that who cares? Who cares if I'm making it up? When I believe this, when I lean into this and believe this, it makes me feel good. And isn't that literally what life is all about? It's just about how you're feeling and how you're moving through your day and how you're experiencing the world. That's the only experience we have. And so I might as well just have an experience where I feel good and I feel like I see these things that are super cool and have these experiences that I feel like are super cool and make me feel good. And you know what? Who cares if I'm making it all up? This is just the life I'm living, and I get to believe whatever I want to believe. And so I feel like when I would start to doubt myself and I would start to think about it that way, it was like, oh, okay, well, then it doesn't even matter if I'm making it up. I'm just going to go with it until over time, eventually it's like, no, this stuff is real. I'm having these experiences and I'm not just making this up. And of course, having conversations with people like Luisa and other friends that I've made where we can have conversations about it. And it's so interesting when, for me, I haven't had any real true spiritual like guidance from like a mentor going through my awakening, just kind of like self-led, kind of doing things and meditations and stuff like that. But then you start having these conversations and you start hearing these very similar stories or things that kind of like make sense. And I've told Luisa so many times about stuff that I saw, and she's like, oh, here's what you're saying. Here's what this is. And, it's like, yeah, she's had sort of like similar experiences. And then, another friend that we have, it's like, oh yeah, like we've had these very similar experiences in meditation. We've seen some of these similar things. And so then it's like, then you really are like, oh yeah, like obviously if all these other people are seeing this too, and we're all having these similar experiences, yeah, of course it's real. And so then I feel like that once you get to that point, then you cross this next bridge or level in your awakening where you're like, fully like, yeah, I believe all of this, and whatever comes to me, I'm just gonna 100% believe it and take it and run with it.
Yeah, and I think another point that you brought up, Kristyn, that I think is really important is the emotional aspect of it. Because I think what Melissa says, it's true at the beginning, is so important that you kind of need a way to like mentally get through it, right? Like to mentally be like, okay, I'm not crazy. I think I told you both that when I started having my awakening and I Googled all my symptoms, my first Google told me I had schizophrenia. That was my diagnosis. I was schizophrenic. And how do we get through it mentally? I think it's so important, that we do. Like, I love what you just shared about, like, yeah, I mean, what if I am making it all up? But this is how it makes me feel, and that's what matters. But I think another really true, like, another point that I think makes it all like so real, at least for me, is the emotionality. You had such a strong emotional reaction to meeting your spirit guide. For me, I mean, I am a Cancer, so like I'm all emotion, but for me, I guess I would say the same thing Melissa said. It doesn't matter if it's not real. The emotion, the emotional reaction that comes from it, for me, makes it all real. Which was the same experience I had when I saw my spirit guides for the first time and like acknowledged them. It was like this welcoming home sort of feeling that I felt. It was like, oh my God, they've just been waiting for me to know that they're there. And with time, I learned that these are people that I had soul ties with and contracts with, and that they're there to support me. But I love the point that you made in the experience that you had with Hecate's. I am a little bit obsessed with Hecate's. I'm just gonna say that out loud. Because of her ability to just kind of like transform and transmute into all these things. I love that experience, and I love that you share that, because that is what it feels like with my angels for me on a daily basis. Usually right after I cuss them out for the crap that I have to go through, it does feel like a snuggly. Sometimes that's the message I'll get. It's like it's a hug from the universe sometimes. It's like we're literally giving you a hug right now. And we don't see it that way because how many movies have we seen in which spirits are displayed that way? We haven't.
Mm.
Like they don't exist, right? And so I think it's so important to share that. And I love that you shared that experience because I think that in essence, and at the end of the day, all these soul contracts that we have in place with all of these other energies, we can call them that, they're there for a reason. And the reason isn't always amazing. The reason is probably to teach us lessons, but are the reason that I cuss them out. But they are there for a reason, and that reason ultimately is to allow us to grow spiritually, to develop spiritually, so that when we leave this 3D world and we go back to our spirit self, that we have evolved, because that is the point. It's evolution. It's like we're not here doing nothing. I mean, we're here having this 3D human experience, but the point of that from a spiritual perspective is to evolve and become a better version of our spiritual selves.
Yeah, I mean, I literally believe that our entire human experience is spiritual growth, right? And you hear over and over again that you come into this existence having forgotten all of this, spirituality that inside of you deep down, but there's a reason you come into being a human having forgotten it, or at least forgetting it. That's part of the journey. And that's where I think a lot of younger kids are much more open to it. But the experience for most of us is that you kind of become much more closed off to it and you kind of forget it. You forget that it was there. And then the whole point is to then re-find it, basically, is to rediscover all of this stuff that's really been there all along and to grow in it, to, grow spiritually throughout this lifetime. I mean, like Luisa said, the lessons, that is what we're here for. We're here for these lessons. That's part of our journey. That's the point of it, so that our soul can take on these lessons and then take them into wherever we go after this and develop even further from that point on.
Yeah, I agree. I have to admit, there's a little part of me that wishes I had gone through this like 20 years ago. Like really could have helped me in life here, people, people, spirits, anybody could have used a
Well,
little help.
but I
But
think to reframe that though, I think that it all happens when it's supposed to, right? I mean, this is truly part
yeah,
of our journey. And, like Louisa said, there are these soul contracts, and there's sort of this like plan that's laid out for you in some respects before you ever come here. It's something that you decided upon. And for whatever reason, this is how your journey was meant to happen. There's a reason that you had your daughter. There's a reason that this was how it was brought into your awareness. And there's a reason that now is the point where you're going through this. And I think for me, there's so much comfort and just truly just comfort in knowing and believing that there's a reason. There's a reason why this has been my journey. And I truly believe that. I think that we go through it at the time that we're meant to go through it. And there's a reason for it. Who knows what the next, 10 years of your life are going to hold, but there's a reason that you're going through this right now. And it is undoubtedly to prepare you for whatever is coming next in your life. What I'm getting is that a lot of it is around your daughter. Like part of your purpose here is to actually cultivate this in your child so that she is this elevated spiritual being moving forward, so that she's able to really truly live into where she's meant to live into spiritually.
That is
yeah,
a little bit crazy, because that's a thought that I had when you were speaking, Kristyn, was that's what came through too. Your daughter is a part of this. Part of your spiritual journey is your daughter. She is directly connected to your spiritual journey. And I think that whenever ago, it just wouldn't have happened because she wasn't here. She wasn't ready to basically push you into embarking on it. And my other thought was a logical thought. I'd love to know how it feels for you now that you've met your spirit guide. How has that experience been for you? Has anything changed? Do you call upon them specifically? I just want to hear about that. Like, how have you experienced that after?
Okay, so I have not met with them again. I tried to meet with my spirit team leader one time. The thing is, I think there's just still stuff I'm figuring out, right? So the instruction I had was to go to your sacred space, activate your spirit leader. They will come, release all expectations. And I don't know if I got my sacred space just right. Like, I don't know. There was no door. There's supposed to be a door so they can enter and leave. I feel like I need to revisit what that looks like for me. So I went there. I invited and activated my spirit team leader, but I didn't get anything. So I felt like that message to me was that I didn't do it right or in a way that they would come, or I don't know, something was a little off.
So I think that it's so funny. As you're saying all of this, I'm relating from the aspect of everything that you sort of said before, the like high achiever, do all the right things, make sure that you're showing up in the right way, being the perfect person and being the good girl, right?
Yeah, totally.
And completely relate with that because that was my entire life. And it's so interesting because I think that what you're saying right now is like this sort of carryover from that aspect of yourself because I truly believe that yes, we can help try to get into an environment that is more conducive to these connections that we're trying to make. And I just don't believe that there are so many rules around it. But
Mm.
as someone who's like a rule follower, I think you're like, what are the rules? Like, tell me the checklist so that I can do all the right things to make sure that I have this connection. And so, like, the connection didn't happen for you. You're like, I must not have followed all the rules correctly. I messed it up somewhere along the way. I didn't get step 4 right. Like, so that's what I'm hearing you say, kind of. But I think that in all actuality, I think, sometimes the connection just doesn't happen. And sometimes we're not in the right place. Sometimes it's just not meant to happen in that moment. And I think a lot of times when we go into a meditation or we go into the space where we're trying to have this connection, we can get really caught up in like that graspy energy of like, I want it to happen and I need to do all the things, make sure that this comes through for me. And I think that a lot of times that stands in our way and sort of like there's a reason that they say like let go of all expectations. Like
Yes,
it's
yes.
Fair.
truly that is part of it, right?
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
want to pick something out super important. Sorry to cut you off, but this is what I love about my spiritual experience. This is what I love about my spirituality is this right here. What has just happened here is the fact that when I'm trying to create a connection and like connect with myself and go within, whether it's my sacred place or connecting with one of my guides, what it does is it brings up all of the 3D, all of the conditioning, all of the limitations, all of the mental stuff that gets in my way. That has been the most beautiful aspect of my spiritual journey is that it forces me to look at my 3D self and all of the BS that I have allowed to infiltrate me that has taken away from my authentic self. And I just wanted to point that out because this is for me the reason I do this podcast, the reason I do my other podcast, Flying Upstream, and literally the reason I do everything is because I think without the awareness of everything that we allow the world to put on us, we are not then aware of how much of ourselves we've actually lost. And there is so much beauty in getting back to that place, and spirituality has done that for me. That's
Mhm.
not true. Spirituality does that for me every single day.
I so appreciate hearing that. And such a good reminder too, because although I have made leaps and bounds forward, you're right that I'm still holding on to what I've been conditioned to do, right? And it will probably take many times of me realizing that and
Mhm.
consciously letting go, letting go, letting go again and again on
Mhm.
my own journey there, you know, and just because I've gone in the right direction and done some really awesome things so far doesn't mean that I have conquered it, right? There is no conquering. You just keep going. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really great reminder. I really appreciate that because I tell my daughter that all the time, and sometimes I forget to turn the mirror back on myself.
Luisa and I talk about some variation of this almost every single episode of this process of letting go, continuously letting go over and over and over again. And as you go along this journey and sort of go deeper and deeper into it, there are these moments where you butt up against everything you need to let go again. It's like,
Mhm.
I thought I let all of this go, and now there's more that I have to let go. And it's this, there's struggle and there is a lot of challenge along the way because letting go of this conditioning, letting go of a lot of the things that you thought you believed or that were like reality for you is the hardest thing you'll ever do.
Yes, and you know what I'm had the beginnings of feeling this. I don't think I'm far enough along on my journey to fully feel it yet, but I have inklings. So I have honestly felt like my whole life, I've never really found my people. Like I have friends that I've had for 20 years that I love dearly, that I would do anything for, but I've never really felt like I fit in 100%, that I am truly accepted 100%, like literally never in my entire life. And I always kind of thought like, oh, well, I am adopted. I was adopted at birth. Maybe there's like some
Mhm.
baggage there I carry. I changed schools a lot as a little kid because my parents moved. Maybe there's some of that, like not fitting in, new
Mhm.
schools. But as I go on this journey, I'm like, no, no, I don't think that was it. I think it was, I really needed to reconnect to all these spirits and that aspect, but also humans like Luisa and Melissa, both of you, like connecting to people who are on your own journeys because not everyone is on this journey. And I think the kind of people that are purposely and consciously on this journey and self-aware enough, those are the people that I feel like my soul needs right now. It's like that full
Mhm.
acceptance of like we're all doing the best we can. We're in this together, even though we're on our separate journeys. And I actually felt this for the first time when I did a meditation to go all the way into the ground to meet Mother Earth. And that was like coming home. I've never felt that before. That we were like excited, but also super relaxed. It's super familiar. That was just totally blew my mind. I was like, this is crazy. I'm in the middle of the earth. You know, what's going on? But that was just really intense for me too. And so I think a big part of this journey is not just reminding myself to let go of how I've been conditioned my whole life, but also realizing that there's so much goodness that I'm going towards. Like I probably don't even know 1/4 of what's to come for me because it's all just good stuff coming at me.
Mhm. Yeah, the coming home, right? Yeah, I totally believe that. And that is, I think, something that we all see and experience on our journeys as well. Once you start to sort of dive into this, it can feel really isolating and feel really lonely because most of the people that you know in your 3D world, like your neighbors and friends that you have around you, you can't have these conversations with them. Like they're just not, I mean, some of
Yeah, I
them,
found that out the hard way.
yeah, some of them can be open to it. Hopefully, there are people who are open to having these conversations, but the majority of them are just going to be like, I don't know. And then you are like, well, now I feel less connected to these people around me, but I want that connection. I want that sort of like sisterhood. And I think that that is something that a lot of us experience. And I think that's what's funny is without even really trying or attempting, we end up finding those people. Like it just ends up being part of our journey. And I think that was part of Louisa and I meeting was like, I wasn't intentionally thinking I need to meet more people who are also going through this. It was just like, oh, there was this post asking for someone who's going through it. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's me. And then I end up meeting one of my people. And so I think that that's kind of what ends up happening is just the universe puts them in your path. And so that you can make those connections, so that you can find that tribe of people who are on the same path.
Yeah, I agree. And here we are.
That's a wrap for this episode.
We hope you found some inspiration, a helpful tip, or maybe just a good laugh.
Remember, amazing human, you are not alone on this path to connect with your inner wisdom and the universe.
To stay connected and keep the conversation going, subscribe to our YouTube channel and our podcast so you never miss an episode.
And if this episode resonated with you, share it with your friends, family, or anyone who might find value in it. Until next time.